And hello to our two players, and hello to all of you. Also, hello to Patrick Sullivan, who doesn't have the kind of jaded gym teacher vibe that he brought to the coverage last season. But you see him there. He disapproves of me. He disapproves of all of you as well. And if you want to learn exactly how, you can write in and read Sullivan's Satchel on SCG Premium.
That doesn't quite have the disappointed gym teacher. That's the history teacher that knows you can learn the countries in Europe better.
He has high expectations of you, and that's why he reacts that way.
Exactly.
Oh, it looks like we may be seeing disabling emotes here. Is that the gameplay setting we're going with?
Oh my goodness. What a monster. Corey Baumeister really turning off Piotr's advantage.
I feel like that is a form of bad manners in itself, Emma. Really limiting Piotr's free expression here. But we are going to see a Reclamation mirror, and this is the sticking point that we spoke about. It's Team Reclamation versus 4-color Reclamation. Glogowski has planted his flag in the 4-color Reclamation camp, and speaking to a lot of those 4-color players, that seems to be more about Dovin's veto, if anything, than Teferi Time Raveler, both of which we see in Piotr's hand.
Yeah, this is a game where you can see that Piotr is really going to be leaning on those advantages that he plans to be able to leverage on the deck list sheet, looking at Dovin's Veto, Teferi Time Raveler, all main deck, with even a hate card like Mystical Dispute, where blue is just ubiquitous enough that you can get away with main decking those sorts of cards.
Absolutely. And for that Players Tour Finals event, everyone going in knew that Reclamation decks would be at least half of the room, and probably a fair bit more. And so with that in mind, you can justify these choices that are heavily targeted at the mirrors. For these events, though, you expect to see more of those aggro decks that were popular, more of a diverse format. So some of these hard targeted choices for the mirror maybe are harder to justify. But Mystical Dispute, we've seen just a decent catch draw. Sometimes you're happy to pay 3 mana just to counter a spell.
Yeah, and I think this is the kind of tournament that, because it rewards both consistency and spiking the entire event, that really you get rewarded for kind of hedging a little bit against the best deck in the format, where even if you play against a couple of aggro decks, you still have the ability to play for that Zendikar Rising qualifier weekend.
But look at this, Emma. Both players, after fast starts here, Glogowski has a growth spiral, doesn't have more land drops at this point, so he's really falling far behind on that all-crucial mana development phase of the game. If he's not making land drops soon, then this game could be over before it begins. Does manage to find the 3rd land drop there to keep him in it for now.
And now it's just a matter of Baumeister trying to capitalize on this stumble from Glogowski. He recognizes that this 4-color deck is going to have more powerful cards pound for pound than Team of Reclamation does, just by virtue of being the same colors, more options, etc. Being able to find Wilderness Reclamation to pair with this copy of Explosion is huge.
And that's exactly what he finds. Wilderness Reclamation off the top there for Corey Baumeister. And that young hungry shark will charge in for 2. And now we saw Piotr pass with Dovin's Veto and Brazen Bar up, as well as the possibility of cycling Shark Typhoon. Also 2 copies of Teferi in his hand. I wonder if, now that he's falling behind on mana development, there is a case for just trying to tap out for Teferi, even in the face of a possible Mystical Dispute. Decides to pass the turn instead. Corey draws and now attempts that Wilderness Reclamation.
I imagine we're going to see a veto being the thing that Glogowski goes for here, but there's also the line of allowing Reclamation to resolve, and then still during Corey's main phase 2, you can bounce it with Borrower and hope that paves the way for a Teferi.
And we know that Corey would have the way to punish that with that Mystical Dispute. But Piotr does use the Dovin's Veto, trades with the Wilderness Reclamation, and crucially, we see why Veto is so good here. If that was a negate, Corey could use his dispute to force that Reclamation through. As it is, just has to accept that trade and pass the turn. And now Piotr tries for the first Teferi Time Raveler that he's drawn, and that is a juicy target for that dispute instead.
Ooh, and Baumeister finding another copy of Explosion off the top. We might just see him... Oh, I was going to say we might see him expansion, but Uro's coming back already.
Yeah, Uro just chilling there in the graveyard. I didn't think that one was so close to escaping, but sure enough, here's Uro breaking its chains with that familiar animation, which I expect we're going to see a lot this weekend.
Love some good old-fashioned slorp magic. How you just going to make me stew in that joke? That was the worst.
I decided just to let that one settle in for the audience. And there is the second Fairy Time Raveler, bouncing Uro back to the hand, but now that Shark Token can pick that off. Corey has a second Shark Typhoon and 2 copies of Expansion Explosion ready to go here. And the shields are down for Glogowski. He's still light on mana. And Baumeister doesn't have a Reclamation, but may not need one, the way this game is developing.
Yeah, at this point, if Baumeister just can make those ever-crucial land drops, these explosions are just going to do the Sphinx's Revelation thing of chaining into enough resources to actually put the game out of reach, even if it doesn't literally put Glogowski to 0 life.
And a second Shark Typhoon for Piotr. Considering his options here, that second Dovin's Veto does allow him to contain the first explosion. The second one, though, could be a big issue.
And this copy of Uro coming down from Piotr, hopefully digging towards some more mana sources. That's really the piece of the formula that Glogowski's missing at this point.
Does Wilderness Reclamation count as a mana source here?
Well, yes. When Baumeister doesn't have counter magic, it's not bad.
And Corey here, with our Shark Typhoon, can afford to, instead of running an explosion into a possible dispute or veto, can just make a Shark instead, get around counter magic that way, and we see another copy of Reclamation off the top for Baumeister.
Is this lethal? How close is it to lethal?
It could be chat lethal. It's definitely virtual lethal.
Like, it's effectively game over. And you see the QQ from Baumeister there. Piotr's gotta know what this means.
This is an explosion for up to 10, if you want to maximize it, I think.
Is he gonna settle for 7? Oh, did he only float 1 red?
Oh, is there some auto-tapping shenanigans going on here?
There we go. Untapped Stomping Ground gets that second red.
The auto-tap solution has changed. You hate to see it.
Honestly, I think Corey is excited to see the shift in the auto-tapper's solution, as long as it means that he keeps getting to crank out these 7-up, 7 in the hand spells.
Look, the auto-tapper is always learning and improving. It's on this quest for self-development.
I love Piotr just going for this Wilderness Reclamation in the face of a grip of cards. When Corey's just discarding lands to hand size, there has to be that sort of glimmer of hope that it's possible that this ends up getting through. And if you're in Piotr's seat, you're so far behind, you need to take these sorts of risks.
If Corey doesn't have anything, then you want to go for it. And if Corey has something, then it's going to be hard to beat that anyway. So put him to the test, make him have it. And maybe he breaks on that explosion. We've seen it happen before. I'm sure we'll see it happen again. Corey, I would not say break on this explosion because he has a second one right there, ready to go.
Well, bright side, Piotr has this Dovin's Veto to check that copy of Explosion, and one of the drawbacks of the Team of Reclamation deck is it has a ton of air. That's to say it has fewer cards that actually impact the battlefield or the opponent's life total.
And here is once again for Corey Baumeister.
I wonder if we could just get an Uro count started on the day. This is our fourth Uro trigger so far, and it is game 1. Correction. 5th Uro trigger. That's why I started. You know it's coming.
We need
going ahead, escaping that Uro.
We need one of those live news tickers at the bottom of the screen just to keep a real-time update on how many Uro triggers we've seen throughout the day. And Uro...
those old-school telethon tickers?
Absolutely. So Uro escaped once again, and Piotr does not have an immediate answer for that one. So with that Reclamation in play, maybe he can find a way to fight over an explosion or something else, but he's going to need something else to get the job done here.
And I think at this point, Baumeister's happy to not fire off that explosion because the onus of action is on Piotr.
And now that both players have Reclamation, it's so much easier for Corey to pick fights here. And you see that Ether Gust, a card which Glogowski has said he's not a fan of in the format at large, and specifically in these Reclamation mirrors. But going to do good work here for Baumeister, containing the Reclamation for Piotr. And are we going to see just an expansion here to throw this right back at Corey?
Yeah, and I like this line from Glogowski largely on the back of the fact that this is a situation that this expansion, if you're choked on mana, you can't do it anyway. Oh, wait! But that's game over! Baumeister just has 12 lands and can cast Explosion for 8 right up to Piotr's face, sending us to game 2.
That auto-tap solution just never stops changing. And as we move to sideboarding here for both players, what stands out in terms of the differences between 4-color Reclamation for Piotr and Temur for Corey?
I think the big thing here is whether or not we're going to see Baumeister leaning into the flash plan, like the sort of tempo-y game plan that we've seen a lot of these sort of Simic-based decks lean into over the last few weeks. One thing that's a large indicator of Corey not being a big believer in that strategy is a complete absence of the card Night Pack Ambusher.
Yeah, this was a go-to pivot card in sideboarding for a lot of Reclamation players, but neither one of these players here has access to that card. So maybe a sign that the format has changed in terms of its effectiveness there.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons that it has is just look over to Canister's sideboard. That copy of Kinrith, the Returned King, never met a 4/4 in his life that he cared about. So really having your entire sideboard plan hinge on a 4/4 that makes 3/3s is not a way that you beat a 5/5 mana sink.
And you see both players de-emphasizing the card Wilderness Reclamation copies in both players' sideboards now, joined with an Expansion Explosion for Corey, recognizing that this is really more of a flash mirror after sideboarding, and that committing mana to your main phase just gives the opponent a chance to win that trade and then punish you for it on their own turn. Although it's harder to do that when they don't have their own Reclamations as often anymore.
Yeah, the gameplay itself is incredibly dynamic, largely on the back of the fact that having a Wilderness Reclamation in play is so powerful that you don't want to completely cut them from your deck, because once you resolve one, the entire game revolves around it. It doubles the total number of mana that you have available and so on. But until you actually reach that point, it is ultimately a 4-mana sorcery that's incredibly susceptible to all of the color-specific hate spells these players are bringing to the table.
Yeah, and you saw that too. Jumpstart, which has made a tremendous impact, certainly in Historic, but in Legacy, even Vintage as well. You can pre-order that now at starcdgames.com/JMP. Not going to see that make an impact in Standard. So we get to game 2 here, and there is Wilderness Reclamation still for Glogowski. He does have the crucial Growth Spiral start to get out ahead here on the play. And on Corey's side, you see, as we mentioned, Narset Pyrovale is a card identified by many, including Alden Machette, as one of the big mirror breakers here. That's the 3-mana Planeswalker that the Autumn and clearly Corey now too have chosen to put their faith in.
Yeah, so this is a card that turns off the power card in Explosion that these Reclamation decks are leaning into, and you see that Uro coming down from Glogowski on the play. Imagine if this was in the face of a Narset. That would just be a 3-mana See the Unknown? Is that the Rivals of Ixalan Explorer card?
Rivals of Ixalan Limited is long in the distance at this point, but I'll trust you on that one. But there it is. With Glogowski not having that 4th land immediately and no way to hold out that Mystical Dispute, Corey gets a chance to land out an Narset, and that's going to be a big deal there for him. Finds a copy of Wilderness Reclamation with it. Drew a Negate last turn, which is an excellent pickup. So everything coming out Baumeister here.
And this is one of the other powerful aspects of Narset in general. In a lot of ways, it almost feels proactive, because the fact that you can minus it twice is giving you about a dig-through time's worth of selection and finding the actual cards that you want to be playing with in the later phases of this game. When you have 29 lands, it's rare that land drops are what you're stressing. So having a card that can find whatever piece of the proverbial puzzle that you're missing is so huge.
Yeah, we've seen Narset in contexts where either the static ability is good or the card selection is what you're looking for, and often just one of those is enough to make it worthwhile. When both of those halves are good, and they're both very good right here, then Narset is fantastic and well worth the sticker price. But look at this. We see during reclamations, Glogowski lands his, Baumeister lands his, but Piotr has Brazen Borrower to bounce coins back to his hand, so Piotr now gets a turn with an uncontested Wilderness Reclamation.
And on one hand, you gotta like Glogowski's odds, because there's just 10 mana on that side of the battlefield, but the explosion half of Expansion Explosion is not castable. There's no red for Glogowski.
And even if it were castable, Narset really makes that far less impressive than you think it would be.
Exactly. This Brazen Borrower has a lot of work to do.
But honestly, though, at this point, just the expansion half copying maybe an opposing negate from Corey Baumeister's side, which, if that was a Dovin's veto, that line is far less effective. But because it's negate, expansion can turn into your own copy of negate in these counterfights if it comes down to that.
Yeah, just having the ability to turn expansion or get the value out of the expansion half is part of what makes that card able to be ran in having so many copies in these reclamation decks. Normally, you're not going to play 4 of a card that doesn't even start doing anything until 5 mana. But because of how strong it is in the Flash Mirrors to just turn into extra virtual copies of negate, you can get away with playing a million copies of it.
And you see both halves of Brazen Borrower are doing great work here. The first half jumped in the way of Corey's own Wilderness Reclamation, and now the 3-1 flyer half of Brazen Borrower is threatening to attack down that Narset, unlocking cards like Uro and Expansion Explosion for Piotr.
And this is that spot where it traded 2 mana for 4 mana. That's that tempo mirror, and now it can pressure this Planeswalker, which is also leaning into being a bit of a card advantage tool and pressure for that tempo strategy that Glogowski is absolutely taking advantage of here.
Corey attempts Wilderness Reclamation again. It looks like Piotr has a Mystical Dispute at the ready. There it is. Draws a second copy as well as backup. Now gets to attack down the Narset with Brazen Borrower.
No red.
Still lacking the red mana for Expansion Explosion, but it looks like are we escaping Uro here, Emma? Do we have to add one to our tally?
Oh.
There it is.
I've already lost count. Pretty sure the 1-800 number you call is actually just the 1800 Uro triggers we've already seen this tournament.
There was a Twitter thread recently of what action in Magic have you taken more than any other player, and honestly, I have respect for the player who has put Uro triggers on a stack more than any other, because that's tough competition at this point.
Ooh, that's a red source off the top for Canister.
Although, crucially, is a come into play tap red source, so we're not exploding this turn, even if we wanted to.
No. Well, maybe that Uro finds another source of red.
And it looks like Corey does not have a way to stop Uro from attacking.
Well, Commence the Endgame stops it from attacking after this attack step. Which is to say, it eats it in combat.
Uro might be heading right back to the graveyard, so another chance for it to escape and add to our running count here. But yeah, that will get to ambush the Uro. Corey will say take 3 from the Brazen Borrower. And actually, Shark Typhoon for Piotr. A payoff that you don't need that untapped red source for. So a great draw there off the Uro, which took one for the team, but rewarded Piotr in the process for it.
Can I make a 10-10 and just present lethal?
I think we can, and then we have Mystical Dispute and Expansion. Not Explosion, mind you, just Expansion as a way to back it up.
So there are 8 total lands, one of them tapped, so -1 and 15, -2. We could have it as big as 13, but like you said, could have that dispute with negate backup and still make a 10-10 to present lethal. That might be the line that Glogowski goes through to try and just close this door before Baumeister has the chance to play all these cards out of hand.
Yeah, so an interesting choice here for Piotr of whether he wants to make a shark that is lethal just by itself, or if he wants to get lethal combined power on the board, which then maybe opens up the Brazen Borrower to getting removed, but in the process get to fight over that or anything else with that dispute and with that expansion.
And it looks like this might just be what's a more conservative line from Glogowski. When you know that Baumeister has access to Brazen Borrowers, you don't want to put all of your eggs into that basket and completely pants yourself against some of the lines that these Reclamation decks can present.
And both players know that these Reclamation Mirrors, after sideboarding, there was a lot of jockeying back and forth over Shark tokens and Brazen Borrowers and so on. So, as you say, he doesn't want to shove all in on one Shark token and take the shields down in the process.
Right, so just making it 8/8 means you're going to have one that holds back this zombie army and is applying significant pressure, but you're not putting all of your eggs and mana into that one basket and then finding yourself colded if it doesn't work out.
Absolutely. And a Desperation Growth Spell here from he knows he needs to find something. Another land isn't going to do it.
Yeah, this is the spot where Corey might just be looking at using this Explosion on Brazen Borrower.
But that's the kind of line which is... Yeah, and that's the kind of line which is very easily contained by a Mystical Dispute. And let's say Corey finds a way to save off lethal on this turn. If he has to take the shields down, doesn't have that negate up, for instance, we know there's that explosion ready to go now. The Piotr does have 2 red mana.
That's one of the tricks that we see from a lot of these pilots, is having red up and getting to convert that into a negate. Ooh, Dovin's Veto off the top.
That one's going to lock it up for Piotr. Send us to a game 3 here. And that 8/8 Shark token, leaving Corey on 2, but now this is in range of a Baby Explosion with Dovin's Veto and Mystical Dispute backup. Corey has his negate at the ready, but that's not going to keep him alive here. He does have a second negate, but that Dovin's Veto is going to lock this game up. So we see Mystical Dispute from Canister, negate number 2 from Corey, and then negates older brother back for Piotr to send us to a game 3 here between Team Reclamation and 4-color Reclamation. And this is a high-stakes game 3, Emma, because I believe whoever wins this match not only is officially the better Magician, but we found which is the better Reclamation deck as well. I think that's how it works.
Really, it's just the Highlander of Reclamation mirrors. And if you like watching Corey Baumeister play this sort of Highlander magic, make sure and check out Versus Live every Tuesday and Thursday, where he does glorious battle against Ross Miriam in really just what is a competition for the ages to take home all the marbles. That's every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on this channel. It's great if you really want to get an insight in how the pros kind of do their play testing, talk about sideboarding, and so on.
Ross brings, you could say, a different vibe than the Canister does. Corey brings the same vibe to whatever he's playing in. Always very friendly, very energetic, and we're bringing his best game not just to our events here, but also to Versus Live. So definitely go check that out, either live on Twitch or on YouTube afterwards. You can check out the VODs at your convenience. And as we move to sideboarding here, once again, before Game 3, are there any play versus draw considerations, and does that change whether you're teamer versus 4-color?
I don't think there's a ton that's really changing that much on the play versus the draw here. So many of these games go to turn 100 that you aren't really that concerned with things on the play versus the draw. There might be a card here that is better or worse if you are 1 mana up on your opponent in those first couple of turns. But for the most part, I think these players are trying to keep their plans more or less the same.
And you see in Corey's hand there a copy of Spectral Sailor. It turns out both players have 2 copies of that card in their sideboard. That's seemingly the go-to creature of choice now as a way to transform, in a manner of speaking, in these Reclamation mirrors.
And I really like Corey just slamming the Spectral Sailor, sorcery speed, turn 1, announcing this card, I don't have to cast it at instant speed. I get to cast it at instant speed, and this time I won't, as a matter of fact.
And the great thing about that card only costing 1 mana is you can kind of pick and choose your window for when to deploy that. You don't just have to run it out at the earliest possible opportunity.
And it's one of your best tools to have with a Wilderness Reclamation. Just the way that it plays 4 mana into your Reclamation, untap, have something to spend 4 mana on. It's just so natural. It feels like the two are a match made in heaven.
We do see this fun sub-game as well later on in the game where your opponent has the ability to cycle Shark Typhoon and ambush that sailor in combat. So do you want to try and get that 1 point in? Do you want to make your opponent commit the mana for the Shark Typhoon mid-combat so that you can do something in your second main phase? Lots of interesting micro decisions there. And we see Gross Power end turn for Glogowski, drawing him into Teferi Time Raveler.
Ooh, speaking of Shark Typhoon sub-games.
Here we go. Piotr passes with 4 mana up. But, you hate to see that if you're a Corey Baumeister fan. That Fable passage, though, he missed on the Gross Bow, did manage to finally find that 4th land. So he can attempt any of the trio of Wilderness Reclamations in his hand. Gonna pass the turn instead here, though.
I think at this point, Corey is just desperate enough to hit land drops that we're going to see him commit resources to activating the Spectral Sailor and trying to dig towards more sources of mana in order to cast these Wilderness Reclamations with protection up behind them.
Is there a case, you think, for just committing now to the first one, not really caring if it gets countered, and if it resolves, then you're off to the races?
I think the big problem there is Canister on his turn will also have the option to respond with his own copy of Wilderness Reclamation. So if you just kind of get clotheslined on this copy of Wilderness Reclamation, things can get very bad very fast. And a lot of these games come down to avoiding these points of no return.
Yeah, you don't want your play to be mirrored if they can contain your Reclamation, untap, stick their own. And Piotr has even more good main phase payoffs with Teferi Time Raveler. But it just seems like that prospect of being able to defend a Reclamation, it looks kind of remote in the face of what's going on Piotr's side.
And you can see Corey trying to sniff out if there's a second Shark Typhoon.
Yeah, picks up an Ether Gust there. Corey's showing some discipline, thinking about when he wants to pick this fight. But as you say, he's content to just sit back on the Spectral Sailor, and that's part of what makes that card so effective in this matchup.
Once Piotr gets this 3/3 Shark, that may be when Corey's under the gun enough that he has to start acting.
Yeah, that puts Corey to the test, to where he now has to start thinking about picking a fight on his main phase. We're going to see him go for Uro and negate. A great pickup there for Corey, but again, you need the lands to use that to defend your big finish with, and he doesn't have those just yet. And we'll see that 3/3 Shark for Piotr. And the land drops keep flowing for Piotr. He loves to see that.
Yeah, if you're in Piotr's seat, just having the ability to keep developing and reach the point of being able to cast 2 must-counter spells in the same turn is huge.
Now, interestingly, Corey, looking over at Piotr's side, he sees a lot of untapped lands and currently 7 cards in hand. None of those can directly interact with anything that Corey could attempt here, so if he goes for a Reclamation, that's going to stick. The coast is clear, but he doesn't know that, and it's hard to assume that looking over at what's going on for Canister.
And there's even a line where we could see Canister going for Teferi Time Raveler after playing a 6th land, just because it's past the point where Corey could Mystical Dispute it. We could see Canister just pay the 3, resolve Teferi, and have a preemptive answer for a Wilderness Reclamation if Glogowski is to tap out in that fight.
Yeah, at that point you start to worry about, well, what if Corey has 2 disputes, but how to put him on exactly that, and even in the worst case scenario, you have your own Reclamation and Explosion to punish Corey with.
And just a pass of the turn. So much happens on the stack that these players are not willing to give an inch on their own main phase.
It's kind of a good problem and a tough problem for Piotr to have, though, because he's applying so much pressure that Corey kind of has to do something and run into Piotr's open mana.
And at this point, I think it all just comes down to Canister wanting to kind of feel out what he thinks is in Baumeister's hand and how to best use his own resources to try and tax an axis that Baumeister isn't prepared to fight on. That might mean slamming a Wilderness Reclamation, that might mean slamming a Teferi, but a lot of what is being emphasized here is just information.
Gross Power here for Canister. finds a triome, and I wonder at this point if he has more interest in just cycling the triome to try and find a definitive piece of interaction, because he has no issue making his land drops at present.
Might just be a Vantress activation.
A nice mana sink there. And that Castle Vantress also a subtle form of pressure, where if you do manage to contain these sharks and you're playing this back and forth draw-go game, that favors Canister now, who has this onboard instant speed form of card selection. And there is a Mystical Dispute for Canister, which that card can lose some of its effectiveness as the game goes on. With Corey currently bottlenecked on 6 lands and feeling the pressure to act soon, that dispute is going to be good here.
Yeah, now we just see Glogowski able to fight so much between this Teferi, this Mystical Dispute, another copy of Wilderness Reclamation, that being another must-counter spell that Canister can just slam if Baumeister commits too much into this Teferi.
We can't be too far away from an Uro escaping for either player here as well.
Oof.
And here we go, Teferi Time Traveler for Canister. Corey does have a Blast Zone, which in a longer game might be able to fight over that, but right now, he doesn't have the time to be fiddling around with that kind of stuff.
And now that Corey has this copy of Shark Typhoon in hand, I imagine that Corey's afraid to actually commit a little bit of mana into this Teferi, because it means that Corey won't be able to have the biggest shark in town on this turn.
Yeah, that's a question for Canister. If Corey fights over this, how much you actually want to sink into defending it? Both players mulling over their options here. The time is running out for Corey Baumeister.
Canister, I believe, with the Castle Vantress on top.
And with Teferi successfully on the battlefield, Canister can follow up with that Reclamation. Gets to put the Triumph into play. Is there any merit to just firing off a smaller explosion now?
It wouldn't surprise me if you just want to get in while the getting's good. At this point, it feels like Glogowski's worked pretty hard to navigate around something like Aether Gust. So just making sure that you are still playing around that resource in particular seems like it would be great for Glogowski.
Reclamation trigger on the stack. No immediate payoff for Canister, and Corey now does get to cycle a Shark Typhoon of his own. He has the biggest shark in town. And so now, Corey does have a window to stick a Reclamation, but thanks to that Teferi, can't really use it in any meaningful way.
And one of the nice things about Glogowski just rolling up Teferi there instead of minusing it on anything is now, if Baumeister attacks that Teferi with this 4/4 shark, Teferi's going to stick around, and Glogowski can just come back and win on the spot with this copy of Expansion Explosion.
Here's Aether Gust attempted by Corey. I don't know if Canister really cares about that, or would fight over it even if he could.
Probably not. At this point, you have this Teferi on the battlefield. I think we might just be a turn away from Glogowski being able to send an entire explosion upstairs for the win.
We can tag with this Uro with Mystical Dispute if we like. And there it is. And Corey has to be tempted to try and attack down that Teferi, but I don't know how well combat's going to work out for him.
Yeah, at this point, okay, so with that copy of Reclamation coming off the top, we see Canister threatening at least an explosion for 8, rather.
That shark tentatively stepping into combat. Corey still choosing his attackers, does send in the shark.
Not to chat lethal too hard, but I think a block with the 2/2 would actually just be a deterministic lethal for canister.
Yeah, because we can bounce back the Sailor, get in damage with the other Shark, and then Reclamation and Explosion is a Splinter Twin situation of a kind, one might say.
And at this point, it just comes down to what canister wants to play around. It's very easy for us to say, oh, this is a deterministic lethal. But without knowing all of the cards in Baumeister's hand, players playing at this level are going to have reads on different things and going to prioritize different cards at any given time.
Oh, but it looks like Canister senses weakness.
Trading a 3/3 for a 4/4 isn't even a bad deal. There's a level where if you think that Baumeister's not going to make that kind of move without having some sort of follow-up, then you just want to make sure that you're continually edging forward and gaining advantages over the course of a long game.
And Canister can feel some security because that worst-case scenario is barely a bad-case scenario at all. There's really no amount that can punish him. And here we go.
Is this lethal?
That's step one. We're going to float 5 mana.
It is
Canister
lethal.
sure seems to think so. We have seen not one emote in this match so far. Until that one. Good game from Corey Baumeister. Canister to take our first match here. Moving on to 1-0 in his first SCG Tour Online Championship Qualifier. Making his debut here on our circuit.